All right, happy Friday. This will be the last video I post until not next week, but the week after. We are going to finish front desk today. Thank you for those who are emailing me or sharing with me some of the writing that you are doing. I appreciate that, and thank you for those of you who are doing MobyMax. I've been keeping track of that as well. So please keep sharing that. I gave you guys some free writing ideas yesterday. Today, I want you to imagine, because it's snowing outside, we suddenly get snow on the 4th of July. What do you do? What do you do when it snows on the 4th of July? Another option would be to put yourself in the book Wonder, become a new character. How would you handle the Augie situation? Write a short chapter like you are a new character in Wonder. And let's see, one more. You become a robot for a day. What happens? So those are some more free write options. Sorry, the boys are playing. Those are some more free write options that you could do to keep yourself preoccupied. Please make sure you're still reading. Oh, a couple of sources that I forgot to tell you about. You can use Epic, obviously, for reading. If you want someone to read to you, you can do Storyline Online. They have tons of picture book stories read by actors on there. And that's another option for being read too if you don't want to do Epic or you need a break. All right, so we left off at the end of the last chapter. Mia had got $300,000. She got it from lots of different investors, from different immigrants, from guests from the hotel, and from messaging the, sending out a letter to the other participants, I guess, from the essay contest who didn't win. So let's see what happens now that she has the money. The nerves tingled in my toes as Mr. Yao's Lincoln Navigator pulled into the motel. We told him on the phone that we had something very important to discuss with him. So, what's this all about? He asked, plopping himself down on the couch. Nervously, my mom looked at my dad. I glanced toward the room where the trash bag of cash was, and out the small kitchen window where Hank, Billy Bob's, and Mrs. Q's heads were squeezed together trying to peer in. They all knew that this was a big moment. We'd like to discuss buying the motel, my mom said. Mr. Yao sat up. Why? Did an interested buyer come? He asked. My dad cleared his throat. Yes, he said. Well, who is it? Mr. Yao asked. Us, my dad said. You? Mr. Yao said. He started laughing. How much did you come up with? $500? He chuckled. Actually, we came up with $300,000, my dad said. Mr. Yao stopped laughing. A war was happening in Mr. Yao's face as denial morphed into rage. How the heck did you get $300,000? Mr. Yao finally asked. That's not important, my dad said. What's important is, do we have a deal or not? Again, Mr. Yao burst out laughing. Do we have a deal or not? Who do you think you are? I jumped in. He's the guy who's about to buy your motel. That's who he is, I told him. Oh, no, he's not, Mr. Yao snapped. There's another buyer interested, and he's offering more. How much more? Mr. Yao shrugged. How much? My dad repeated. What's the difference? You can't afford it. How much? 50,000. We called up every single investor, but unfortunately nobody had any extra money. They'd already given us every dollar they had. Even Mr. Cooper said his hands were tied. He added that if the deal did not go through by the end of the month, he would need his $50,000 back so he could put it in one of his other investments. I dropped my head into my hands. Everything was slipping away. All of my hard work. It felt like losing the essay contest all over again. Except it hurt so much more this time because I was letting everyone down. I hugged the humongous trash bag of money and cried. I cried for all the motel essay contest applicants who once again failed to get a motel. I cried for young Hank getting pushed around by all those mean kids, and old Hank, 40 years later, still getting treated unfairly. And for Lupe's dad, boiling away on the roof every single day under the blistering sun. I cried for Mr. Abion, the convenience store guy from the Philippines, and Mr. Bagwati, the laundry guy with his raisiny fingers and hunched back washing bundle after bundle of clothes. I cried for Uncle Zhang, poor Uncle Zhang, who had no money but still insisted on contributing because it was so important to him to help us in our hour of need. And all the other uncles and aunts who sent us money hoping for a slice, however tiny, of the American dream. And now it was all going to fall apart. $50,000 we couldn't come up with, even if you opened us up and sold us for parts. Slowly, I stood. I dried my tears, picked up the bag of money, and walked into the living room. Hey, where are you going? My parents asked me. I'm going to call the investors, start returning all of this money. I told my parents. They shook their heads. We have an idea, they said. Chapter 65. No, I said, shaking my head firmly. Just this once. We're so close. Dad, you saw what happened to Uncle Ming. The memory of his black eye and the bruises on his neck where the loan sharks grabbed him ripped through me. I know, but this is different. You said it yourself. This is a huge opportunity. I looked up at my dad. I had never seen so much determination and hope in his eyes. We're this close, my dad said, holding up his fingers. My mother put her hand over mine. Just this once, she repeated. We'll pay them right back. Just this once. Hour after terrifying hour, I sat and waited at the front desk. The loan sharks were coming. I pictured hammerheads swimming up to the front desk, glaring at us from the sides of their heads. They pulled up to the motel in a black Cadillac DeVille. 3 big Chinese guys stepped out. They were all wearing leather jackets. One of them had the tattoo of the word Ren in Chinese on his neck, which means to suffer. Another had a big tear in his ear, like someone had ripped off his earring. And the third, the boss of the group, had oily skin and long stringy hair, which he wore in a ponytail. There was this big bulge in his jacket, and I swallowed hard as they stepped through the bulletproof glass door. You understand, for an amount this large, we're going to need some collateral, the oily boss of the loan shark said to my dad. The 3 of them sat on the small sofa in our living room. With a trembling hand, my mom poured them the last of our jasmine tea. Yes, my dad said, that makes sense. What do you need? Passport, ID, he said. I felt myself go cold. But Uncle Zhang, I reminded my dad. My dad put a finger over his mouth. Not now. It'll be returned to you, of course, once you pay us back, the oily boss said. His voice lingered. But if you don't pay us back the $50,000 plus another $20,000 on top, well, then... The boss glanced at his associates. His associates stretched out their hands and cracked their knuckles. With every crack, fear jolted down my spine. Chapter 66. It was decided that afternoon that the loan sharks would come back with the $50,000 and my parents would hand over our passports and IDs. I walked to school with nails in my stomach. It was the last day of school. As we cleaned out our desks and counted down to the last hour, Jason walked up to me. Hey, he said. In his hand, he was holding a pencil. It was my sparkly green pencil. Been meaning to give this back to you, he said, handing the pencil back over to me. I looked down at the pencil in my hands. I'd expected it to be super short and beat up by now. I had visions of Jason's dog chewing on it, Jason stabbing things at home with it, wearing it down to a nub, but it was exactly the same length as before, and as beautiful and sparkly as ever. Thank you, I said. This means a lot to me. I hugged my pencil in my hands. I'm sure you'll write great things with it, he added. I looked up at him, surprised. Like the piece you wrote about coming to America. A smile stretched across my face. Thanks, I said. Jason looked down at the floor. I'm sorry I made your years so miserable, he said softly. It's okay, I said. I'm sorry, too, for, you know. I could see in his eyes I didn't need to remind him about the time in the auditorium. He probably remembered every day. Here, I have something for you, too, I said. I reached deep down into my backpack and pulled out a thank you letter I'd been meaning to give him. I'd been carrying it around in my backpack for months. Jason looked down at the note, surprised. He smiled as he read my words. As I turned to leave, Jason reached out and touched my arm. What? I asked. He's bluffing. There's no other buyer. There's no other buyer. It's just you guys. He'll take a lot less for the motel. I stared at Jason with his brown eyes glazed with courage, but it was his kindness that blew me away. When the school bell rang, I ran. I ran as fast as the wind could carry me, adrenaline powering my skinny legs. With each step, I whispered a prayer. Please let me get there before the loan sharks do. I turned the corner onto the Coast Boulevard just as the loan sharks' Cadillac pulled into the motel. As 3 loan sharks got out of the car with suitcases full of cash, I raced into the parking lot screaming, Mom! Dad, don't do it! Mr. Yao's bluffing! My parents promptly called off the deal. The loan sharks grumbled about how they came all this way and went to a great deal of effort to put the money together. So my dad gave them $20 for gas and their troubles, and they piled back into their car and left. As they drove away, my parents collapsed onto the ground. "That was close," my mother exclaimed. My dad put his hand over his pounding heart as he stared at the wide-open sky. "Thank God," my dad said. As my parents lay panting on the side of the parking lot, I walked over to the front desk and called Mr. Yao. "Mr. Yao, we'd like to make you an offer on the motel," I said. $300,000, and not a penny more. "He said yes!" I screamed, running through the motel. The Weekleys were in Hank's room playing Monopoly. When they heard the news that Mr. Yao agreed to sell to us, Hank slapped the Monopoly board and all the pieces went flying. "What did I tell you?" Hank said to Billy Bob. "If it can happen in Monopoly, it can happen in life." Mr. Yao came over with Jason and the real estate agent the next day, as did Lupe, Lupe's dad, Mr. Cooper, the immigrants, Mr. Abion from the convenience store, Mr. Bugatti from the laundromat, and some of the motel essay people who had driven down because they wanted to see their new motel with their very own eyes. Mr. Cooper brought over his lawyer friend who helped us draw up the contract. There were so many people we couldn't all fit into the manager's quarters. We had to put chairs and tables out in the parking lot. "All right, let's get this over with," Mr. Yao said. It took ages for Mr. Yao and his agent to count up all the money. When he was finally convinced it was all there, Mr. Yao lugged the bag over to his car and dumped it in the trunk. His agent then sat down with Mr. Cooper's lawyer and poured over the sales and purchase agreement. We all huddled around watching as they wrote each of our names under buyer. There were so many owners, we needed 3 additional pages just to fill out all the names. My father's voice shook as he told the agent how to spell his name. "I never thought this day would actually happen," he said. "Me neither, my friend," said Hank, putting an arm around my dad's shoulder. "Me neither." When everyone finished signing their names and Mr. Yao officially handed my parents the keys, Lupe and I jumped up and down screaming, "We did it! We did it! We did it!" Jason smiled. "You know what I'm going to do?" Hank asked, his eyes twinkling. "What?" I asked. Hank ran toward the sparkling blue pool. He let out a yelp as he jumped in fully clothed. "Hey!" Mr. Yao called, but only with a fraction of his usual force. "You can't jump into my pool with your clothes on." "It's not your pool anymore," Hank called back. Mr. Yao opened his mouth to protest and then closed it. One by one, Lupe and all the Weekleys and essay people and immigrants jumped in too. My dad threw in my mom, and my mom shrieked with glee. Everyone was waiting for me to come in. I turned to Jason. "You coming?" I asked him. Jason turned to his dad and asked if he could stay. Mr. Yao scoffed. "You don't want to go swimming with these losers, do you?" he asked his son. Jason shook his head. "No, Dad," he said. "I'm going swimming with the winners." Hand in hand, we jumped into the pool. As we splashed and swam in the sun-kissed water, my mother suddenly remembered something very important. Wait, she said. "Let's get a picture." "I'll take it," Hank jumped out. As he held up his hand and clicked, I looked around at my new family and smiled. It was a picture I'd been waiting for a long, long time. I'm just going to quickly read the author's note because that was the end of the book. Many of the events in Front Desk are based on reality. Growing up, I helped my parents manage several motels in California from when I was 8 years old to when I was 12 years old. As a kid, I both loved and feared the front desk. I loved the thrill of working, the fact that I could ask an adult for their ID and they had to give it to me. I was also petrified at night. I would go to sleep with this choking, painful anxiety, not knowing what might happen in the middle of the night. The part about me as mom getting beaten up really happened to my own mother. Would both my parents still be there in the morning when I woke up? At school, I couldn't talk about it with any of my friends. How could I explain to them that my parents came to the United States with only $200 in their pocket? That for the first year I slept on a mattress we pulled out of the dumpster, hoping my dreams greeted me before the stench did. I also couldn't explain the love and hope that grew out of poverty, how much I bonded with the Weekleys, how we watched out for one another and celebrated the joys together, however small. How my parents hid fellow immigrants from the boss and used a blue baseball cap on the front desk as the secret sign. How a pair of stray cats had kittens on the back stairwell, and we hid the kittens in the rooms too. My dad made soup for the customers when they weren't feeling well. How we became a family. Our new family helped us get through the loneliness and frustration of our situation. The fact that we left behind our friends and family in China, thinking we were going to a better land, only to see our friends and family get rich back home in a way no one could have ever foreseen. There were 536,000 immigrants from mainland China living in the United States in 1990. Unlike these Chinese immigrants who came before them, the post-1965 Chinese immigrants were predominantly skilled. They were highly educated, leaving behind good careers. They took a bet that China was not going to change, and they were wrong. Many of them left with very little money because China was still fairly communist in the 80s and early 90s. China has, of course, modernized greatly since then. There is no longer the one-child policy. Now there's a two-child policy. And apartments in Beijing and Shanghai now cost several million US dollars and come with private showers. But in 1990, China's per capita GDP was only US $317. Once in the United States, these immigrants struggled to survive, working long, excruciating hours in manual labor jobs for very little pay. The median annual income in 1989 for Chinese immigrants in the United States was only $8,000, lower than any other immigrant group. This unique set of circumstances made these immigrants particularly vulnerable to exploitation and hardship. No group of Chinese immigrants before or since came with quite so little and gave up quite so much. Later, some of these immigrants would go back to China and not recognize the country they left. They would not recognize their brothers and sisters in their designer clothes and handbags. Their brothers and sisters would not recognize them. Neither would the new Chinese immigrants, who would arrive in business class and not understand why anybody would ever turn to the loan sharks. I grew up listening to the stories of these immigrants, stories that brought tears to my eyes and chilled the air in my lungs. I'll never forget when my mom's friend came to stay with us and confessed he worked 18-hour days and slept in his boss's basement because his boss took away his passport and ID. I stayed up all night writing his boss a letter. Though I was just a kid, my letter scared the boss and my mom's friend was freed. I hope in telling these stories, these immigrant struggles and sacrifices will not be forgotten. They will not be forgotten. And to the nearly 20 million immigrant children currently living in the United States, 30% of whom are living at or below poverty, I hope this book brings some comfort and hope. You are not alone. Somewhere out there, somewhere in the universe understands exactly what you're going through, including all of the fears swirling in your mind or your parents' minds that you're just a bike. You are not a bike. Finally, I hope that through this book, more people will understand the importance of tolerance and diversity. The owner of one of the motels we managed told us not to rent to African Americans, saying they were dangerous. This infuriated us, and we did not listen. To this day, my family and I are forever grateful to the many wonderful people from all different backgrounds who made us feel welcome in our new country and helped us in times of need. Often during tough times, the first instinct is to exclude. But this book is about what happens when you include. When despite all of your suffering and heartache, you still wake up every morning and look out the world with fresh, curious eyes. So, this was written by Kelly Yang, and she actually did experience a lot of things in this book. And as we have been talking about throughout this unit, about how we can learn to accept and appreciate diversity through literature, I hope that this helped you do that. I hope it helped you get a glimpse into a world that is so very different than our own, because in our community, we're in a bubble. We don't see a lot of diversity. So I hope when you do go out and you explore different worlds or you explore different communities or cultures, that you are accepting and you're open and you are understanding that diversity is a good thing and that we can all learn from each other. So I'm going to have to find another book to start reading to you. Not during this next week, but the week after, and we will start with that. Finish the packet that the first packet that I gave you. I think now would be a good time to do Jason and Mr. Yao. We saw a lot of changes of Jason throughout the book, especially in these last couple chapters, and we saw how Mr. Yao really didn't change and how he is not a good person, but that doesn't mean that Jason doesn't have to be. So do those two characters if you haven't done so already. Take your vocab quiz if you haven't done so already, and finish the other author's viewpoint and inference pages. Get that stuff done, and then after next week I'll start explaining the second packet. Again, make sure you're doing MobyMax even during spring break. Even though you don't have to do work, I still encourage you to read and write every day. Email me, whatever you want to do. I'd love to stay talking to you. So I hope you guys have a great spring break. Stay safe. Love you. Miss you all.